Good morning and welcome to The Art of Composition. Thanks for joining me today. I appreciate it. Coming up on a weekend, which is great. I received an email a few days ago from John Rosiak, and his son Paul is a classically trained artist, studied with Juliet Aristides, and some of his drawings are in her new book. I believe it's Beginning Drawing Atelier, the sketchbook. So he sent me a link to the finalist of the Portrait of Society. And I guess Paul, I think he landed in the finalist category. So I'm on their website, the Portrait of Society, and I thought I would look at some of the winners and just make a few comments that might help those that want to improve their visual literacy skills, as well as share really good work. And I believe Anna Rose Bain placed 6th or 7th place in this. So let me just go through these and see what I can find. I have a cup of coffee with me today, so I might pause the video. But anyway, this is the first one that I came upon. I love this. Absolutely beautiful moment. This is something I would hang on my wall. But the first thing I noticed is you have a dominant horizontal line here. And it also intersects at a key point in the composition. The mother kissing the child, the boy, on the forehead. And this horizontal line runs right into that area there. That's key. That's the first thing I noticed. I also noticed in the boy's toe, notice how the eye travels down and then it continues on in this white area of the water. In design, there's a concept called coincidences. And what that means, you have lines that coincide with other lines. And it allows the eye to travel through the composition smoothly. And you can learn more about coincidences in my user's guide. I believe it's in both of them, the photography and the art one. So just worth mentioning. Beautiful composition, lovely painting, tender moment. Great work. I'm not sure if I'm going to go through all of these, but I just figured I would comment. You have a dominant vertical here. Your dominant horizontal line is here. I would say this right here is your dominant diagonal line, but notice the color in here and how intense it is compared to the other colors. You have a lot of magenta or reddish tones throughout this composition. And then you have the contrasting yellow in this area here. I don't talk too much about color theory because, to be honest, I've watched Myron's DVDs on it, but because I'm a photographer, that's not an area that I want to spend a lot of time studying. And in art, drawing and painting, there's so much information that you have to learn. You have to learn how to draw. You have to learn how to compose. You have to understand color theory. There's just so much involved that there's no way on my website that I could cover everything. So I don't talk too much about color theory, but just from personal observation, I can tell this yellow contrasts with the rest of the color scheme of this painting. I'm not going to comment on every single one of these. It's interesting with the realist movement. My personal preference is this. I like paintings that they're realistic, but they still look like paintings, and sometimes the line gets a little bit fuzzy for me. And I'm not saying I dislike more that are more realistic, but personal preferences, I like the ones that look more like paintings. But this is lovely as well. I've done a lot of street photography videos, and I'm always talking about text and backgrounds and elements and backgrounds is just as important as the subject you're photographing. This is a good example, and you can learn a lot from paintings. Notice how all the text in the background, there's nice cuts here. In other words, there's no weird cuts in the text. And in this portrait, obviously the guy's a teacher. But all of this text in the background is just as important, and how it's framed in. You just have to be aware of the elements in the background in street photography. And my recommendation is to study painters. And this is a good example of an effective cut when it comes to text. I don't have an agenda with this lecture today. I'm just looking around. And I will provide a link to this website so you can take a look yourself. Obviously, there is a mood of blue, I guess. And I'm sure I would be blasted by those that really understand color theory. Maybe I'm not using the right terminology, but I guess I'm speaking basically here. Like I said, I don't know much about color theory because I'm a photographer. And in photography, you don't have that kind of control over color that you do as an artist that draws and paints. And that's just, again, one more difference between drawing and painting and photography. It's interesting because I remember reading once, or maybe Aristides was talking about it in an interview. I think it was on classical painting, lessons in classical painting. And there's an interview at the beginning of that DVD. She's talking about how there's these photographers out there that are copying, setting up portraits that resemble old master paintings, but it doesn't work. And even though it's a popular thing, a photograph cannot capture the depth of a painting at all. And Manny Tice talks about that in her podcast as well. And this is where photographers don't understand. Photography is not drawing and paintings have much more depth than any camera could ever record. Now, I'm not saying photography is an art. I'm not saying that at all. But you have to understand the differences between the two mediums. So, just something to think about. Good figure ground relationship here. It's interesting because one other thing too, when you're looking at paintings, you have to notice sometimes in a classically trained artist painting that the colors are more subtle. They're not vibrant. And even though they might appear vibrant, it's only because of their relationships of the values that are around them. So in other words, a color can look more intense than it actually is due to the surrounding values or other colors that it merges with. And I do talk about that a little bit in my user's guide. I don't talk about it heavily though. I assume this is a sculpture. Beautiful. Julie Bell, I've talked about her in the past. She's very famous. I believe she does a lot of these, what's the word I'm looking for? She does a lot of commercial work, and her husband does a lot of commercial work too. The fantasy type stuff. But I have mentioned her before. This is nice. There's a lot going on, but I really like this. Very strong shape in here. This is beautiful. This is what I was talking about when I was talking about realism, but not hyper-realism, I guess. Maybe that's a better word. Beautiful. Still looks like a painting, but it's realistic. I'm not a huge fan of still life. I can appreciate it. For example, I love this. This is great. Again, it's not hyper realism. Looks like a painting, but it's not a Pollock. I can I can translate it visually. Stunning. You know, it's interesting when I look at this right away. I see this dominant diagonal line right here coming into play, and I would even say your vertical is here. Possibly here, but I would say more likely here. Then your horizontal line is right there. I might analyze this one. It's really nice. This is great too. But again, you can tell the difference between this one and this one. This looks more like a painting. The next one for me is getting into that area of realism, but you do have elements back here that that tell me that it's a painting, like the background, which is great, the texture, brush strokes in the background. This is gorgeous. Beautiful painting. The first thing I notice about this, the eye travels down here, picks up this line, and it continues on. Notice how this is coming through here with the strong blue. For those that are listening to this video lecture, you don't have to email me about color theory because I fully admit maybe I'm not using the right terminology when it comes to color. This is beautiful. I'm very familiar with this artist. I have looked at their work before. I think I found them on the Art Renewal Center. This is fantastic. I like to see the brush strokes. And paintings like this really emphasize that. This looks like Julie Bell in many ways, her style. You have a dominant diagonal line right here. Well, I should say you have one here, but then a diagonal line here that creates tension. Okay, so you have a stronger diagonal line here, but then this diagonal line here creates tension. And Meyer Barnstone talks about that in dynamic symmetry. In dynamic symmetry, your intersections, two diagonal lines always intersect at 90 degrees, and that causes visual tension. But this looks a lot like Julie Bell's style of realism. Commissioned portrait, this is nice. For the most part, I like portrait paintings better than I do photographs. I can appreciate a good portrait. For example, Steve McCurry, one of his most famous photographs, I believe it's Afghan Girl, I think. Everybody knows it was on National Enquirer, but I think for myself, I like portraits and paintings better than I do photographs, but I appreciate both. Sculpture, lovely. Really nice. I don't know all that much about sculpture. I fully admit that. Commissioned portrait. Notice how the subject is framed in this line here. It's nice. In this one, good figure-ground relationship. Notice how the head is framed in the background, but there is space, negative space between the hair and the face. So in other words, this area in here stands out. It reads clearly. And also notice here, and I tell photographers this, look at how in a painting the text is cropped. There's no confusing crops here in the text. And it's really important, and I pointed out, it might seem like a minute thing to point out in photography, but it's really important. And if you look at master photographers, you'll see the same thing. This is the type of painting that I like. It's realistic, but it's not hyper-realism. Beautiful. This work is so good. I guess that's it. I know Anna Rose Bain is in this group. Let me see if I can continue on, though. Maybe there's more here. No, I guess not. That's going to be it. I'll provide the link to these winners, and you can take a look at it yourself. Maybe drop a grid or two on them, see what you can find. But thanks for joining me today. I appreciate it, as always.